All right, so last week we had our first week of our introduction to Romans, and we covered some pretty important aspects. One of the most important being why it's important to do introductions. Romans has kind of a reputation of being one of the most difficult books in the New Testament. It's kind of heady to some degree. You have to follow his argumentation. In reality, it's not that bad. There are a few places where we're going to get to, and we're going to say, okay, what exactly is he trying to get across here with this discussion? And there might be some things. But overall, Romans actually is an incredible example of just kind of how masterful Paul does with his flow of thought, just kind of his debative style of writing, his polemical way of writing. So in Romans, I think part of the reason that it has the kind of reputation that it does is because it has been used a lot to answer questions or to discuss conversations, challenges, debates that simply were not going on in the first century. That it has been used in Reformation, post-Reformation discussion, and has been looked at and viewed as simply a discussion of what, again? What's the just the typical view of Romans that it's discussing? What question? Okay, a salvation of faith versus a salvation of works. Are you saved? Are you justified by faith? Are you justified by works? And that has been heavily influenced from the days of what influential Reformation leader? All right, from the days of Martin Luther. Luther really used this, saw this kind of as one of the highest, most important of Paul's epistles, because in his mind it so clearly demonstrates this justification by faith versus justification by works. We talked about last week, though, does it simply boil down to faith versus works? What's the question going on in Paul's day? Okay, Jews and Gentiles, yes. Very specifically, though, which of the two gets harped on the most? The Jews. And we're going to find that really most of Romans, the vast majority of Romans, is written to the Jewish Christians there in Rome, particularly those influenced by whom? All right, the Judaizers, the Judaizing teachers of the day. Again, not a term that you actually find in the New Testament. It's a term that has been coined in order to describe the discussion that's going on during the day, during that time frame. But generally speaking, the Judaizing teachers believed what about salvation? That the cross was open to whom? All right, the cross is open to the Jews. Why? All right, they have the law of Moses. Why else? All right, they're the seed from Abraham. So they have Abraham. They have the law. They have the promises. Mike said they are the seed that's promised in Genesis 12, Genesis 22. So you kind of have this idea that for them, their relationship to God through the law of Moses gives them an access to the cross and salvation that comes from the cross. The way that Paul talks about this, writes about this, it's as if they are justified by the law of Moses so that they can then come to the cross itself and have the relationship with God through Jesus. So what about poor Mr. Gentile out here? Does he have the law of Moses? Does that mean that he can never come to the cross? That this is only for the Jews? What does that mean for the Gentile, according to the Judaizers? Okay. Yeah, the law of Moses serves kind of like as a funnel that Mr. Gentile here can come adhere to the law of Moses, particularly what is the phrase that Paul uses? Okay, circumcision is kind of the one law that he focuses on quite often in his letters to use as, it works as a synecdoche for the entire law, that this one law represents all of it, right? But he uses this phrase a lot. All right, the works, finish it though. All right, the works of the law. Go back to Galatians 2:16, right? Where we know that no man is justified by works. Is usually where people end that. Paul doesn't. Paul says works of the law. We know that no man is justified by works of the law, but through faith in Jesus Christ. So it's the works of the law very specifically being the law of Moses, that they would teach a man is justified here in order to come to Christ. Paul, what is Paul doing with Mr. Gentile out here? All right, he's telling them he can go directly to the cross and find his justification simply comes through what? All right, through Christ, through faith in Christ, right? Faith in Jesus. So this is kind of the thing. Paul rejects this notion, and that causes some issues with some of these Jewish Christians, these Judaizers, who are saying Paul is missing the point. And so they raise objections, and as we see these objections through the letter, we're going to bring them out, talk about them, and show how they are objections. All right, so last week we talked about the author, talked about who the Romans are. We mentioned, when was this written? All right, 56, 57, right around in there. And then from where is he writing this? All right, he's in Corinth. He's made it as, remember Corinth was the final destination of his second journey, and it becomes the final destination as far as his expansion westward of his third journey before he heads on to Jerusalem. And I think that's significant. Remember Paul's third journey, was it even really a missionary journey per se? No, he's not going out and establishing new churches and new places and walking into a city that's never seen the gospel before and going into the synagogue. He goes to Ephesus. There's already a church there. Now he spends probably a longer period of time there than any other place. And he teaches at the school of Tyrannus, or debate on exactly what that is, but he uses their hall in order to teach from, so that it says, all kinds of people throughout Asia were hearing the gospel, and it was going out. But it's not what he does in the first journey. It's not what he does in Macedonia and Achaia in his second journey, and I think he misses it. And so here he is in his furthest west spot that he's made it, not geographically west, but as far as his journey goes, the final point, and he's looking westward from the isthmus there, and what does he see? Not literally with his eyes, but in his imagination. What's he seeing? All right, he's seeing Spain. And we see that in chapter 15, right? Chapter 15, Romans chapter 15, he says, chapter 15, verse 24, I hope to see you, to stay with you for a good long while. Is that what you guys have there? I wish to see you what? What does he say? All right, I want to see you I hope to see you in passing as I make my way to Spain and to be helped on my journey there by you, once I have enjoyed your company for a while. So what does that then tell us about this letter? Why does he sit down and pen a letter to the Roman churches? Okay. May not be planning to be back to Rome. Well, he plans to go to Rome, though. I mean, he says, I plan to stay there in passing. Yeah, Sharon? Yeah. Yeah, I think this is, at its core, a support letter, as we call them, and letting them know, hey, I'm ready to start embarking on a brand new trip further west. I want to go to Spain, and right now, y'all make the best place to springboard on my way to Spain. I know that there's, a solid church that's there. Does he know anybody in the church that's there? Yeah. Who do we know that he knows? Oh, this one's an easy one. Who's in Rome? All right. Aquila and Priscilla are in Rome. Does he know Aquila and Priscilla fairly well? Yeah. So he definitely knows folks. And when you read through the ending remarks at the end in chapter 16, the greetings, there is a lot of familiarity that you find. So he knows people who are there, and he knows there are people who can help him. So at its core, I think that's what prompts Paul to sit down and write this. Now, we didn't talk about this because we ran out of time last week. Is there anything that he's wanting to do very specifically for the church in Rome itself? We very, very briefly read it, but we didn't really talk too much about it. Yeah, Lorraine? All right. So that's in chapter 1. Lorraine's in Romans chapter 1. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So Lorraine read for us verse 11. I want very much to see you so that I may impart to you some spiritual gift and your translation. Do you have the New American Standard? Is that what you're using? Yeah, I like the New American Standard translation of this. Not that the other ones are horrible, but New American Standard says to establish. Now, some of the other ones, like the CSB has to strengthen, I believe. Let's see, the ESB there has strengthen, to strengthen you. Anybody have anything different from that there?
Just to report on the King James Version.
Yep. Okay, to establish. So I think what the King James does there, and I think what the New American Standard does there, I think there may be something to that. And it's been over a week since I looked at it, but I'm pretty sure that the word there, establishing is kind of the idea. Now, exactly what it means, translators obviously are differing on opinion. It may very well be that as of this point in time, what perhaps has not happened in Rome. Okay, say it louder. All right. Perhaps at this point in time, there has been no apostle in Rome. Thus, there has not been a visit from an apostle who is able to do what? Right. Impart spiritual gifts upon the church. Now, are there individuals there who perhaps have had spiritual gifts imparted upon them? Aquila and Priscilla, right? And some of these other ones that it seems that Paul has familiarity with. We know that people from Rome were where in the early part of Acts? They were in Jerusalem on the day of Pentecost. So it very well could be Rome is specifically mentioned as one of the cities that there were representatives from. Very well could be there were individuals there who received spiritual gifts. This is not to say that nobody in Rome has spiritual gifts, but this might be an indication that no apostle has actually come there and established or formulated this church with some kind of apostolic blessing as of yet. That's kind of the way that I take it. Ask me in 10 years, it might be different. I'm not sure. But that's kind of the way that I understand this. I think it makes a little sense for him to say, I really want to come to give, to impart spiritual gifts there so that we can establish this group, this church here, in the same way that churches have been established by apostolic blessing in other places. Does that make sense? Is that fair? Let me throw that out. Is that a fair view? Yeah, Sharon? Mm-hmm. Yeah, the pushback that I would have against the idea of it's just simply being strengthening is he, and I could be mistaken, but this isn't a phrase that he uses for other churches. He'd like, I want to come and do this. I want to come and impart a spiritual gift to you to strengthen. And I might be mistaken. I may go back and look at it and find, I'm totally wrong on that, and that he actually uses this all the time, and it's just not coming to mind. But it seems there's something different from just coming and doing what he normally does when he walks into a church and strengthens them. That there is an absence of spiritual gift in some way, some void, some vacuum that he desires to come there to fill this. That is not in the other churches that he comes to. Where that's not an issue, and he doesn't come to fill this void. So that's all. If you want to go with strengthen, that's fine. Like I said, I may change my mind in the next 10 years on this. This isn't going to be a cost of discipleship type of, or a cost of fellowship type of discussion. So, all right. What we really need to talk about, though, is this question: if I'm correct, if Paul is writing this simply because this is a support letter, let me throw this out to maybe some of y'all, like you, the elders who are here. Have you all received support letters before? Richard, Mike, Jeff? Yeah. Have they been 16 chapter support letters that talk about all kinds of doctrinal issues? Have you ever gotten those? No? All right. Anybody else ever seen a support letter that has about 2 paragraphs of asking for support and then pages upon pages of other stuff? Now, this is a weird support letter, isn't it? If he's asking for support from them to come spend time with them, get help on passing, go on his way to Spain, if that's what prompts him to sit down and write this, which I believe that that's what prompts him to sit down and write this, why in the world do we have 16 chapters of not 16 chapters of wholly unrelated stuff, but probably a good 14 and a half chapters of stuff that's not related to his asking for support? Yeah, Kevin.
Well, this was the major issue that was
All right, so Kevin said this is the main issue that was an attack upon the faithful. This is the main thing that they are dealing with. Was that, I think it was almost verbatim. Yeah, I was kind of proud of myself on that one. Yeah. Do we have someone who can run a mic just for longer comments? I think we have the mic that's ready back there. I think Kelly's teaching. He normally picks it up and does that. Do you need a mic? Do you have more than like 6 words? I've already expanded my ability to. I wasted all of that with Kevin's statement, and my memorization now is it's gone. All right, Mike's coming up here. Julia has a comment to make.
He also says in chapter 1, verse 15, that he's eager to preach the gospel to them.
Okay.
Which, if their understanding of the gospel is erroneous, that could cause some problems. So possibly he's trying to get that out of the way before he even shows up.
Yeah, and verse 15 is his transition piece. I mean, that, he's said, hey, this is what I'm wanting to do. I've wanted to come to you. I haven't been able to. I go to preach the gospel to all Greeks, barbarians, wise and foolish. I'm eager to preach the gospel. And then we get into verses 16 and 17, which is, he says, this is the thesis statement, because I'm not ashamed of the gospel. And so, yeah, verse 15 there is really that introduction into the gospel to start very specifically in 16 and 17 to talk about that. So yes, it has everything to do with it because that's what this is, right? This is a gospel discussion. Remember how he coined or talked about this in Galatians? He said to you, I'm surprised that you are so quickly doing what? All right, turning aside to a different gospel. And he says, and it's not even a gospel. It's not even good news that you're going to. And so, yeah, this whole discussion in Paul's mind is a mutation of the true gospel. And so we're going to see that that's what's under discussion here. Now, about how much time has transpired between Galatians and Romans? If we take this as AD 56, 57?
6, 7 years.
Okay, we're looking about 6, 7 years or so, 7, 8 years. Remember, Galatians AD 49, is when that was written. So, we're moving, 7, 8 years or so. And we've got a lot of distance as well. So, this really is an issue that Paul is having to deal with in various places. So he writes this to the Romans. I'm going to ask again, why? I think there's a very clear reason why he would write this to the Romans. But you have to connect some background dots. All right, let's connect them. Who does he know from Rome? All right, he knows Aquila and Priscilla. All right, this time I'm going to have a map out, kind of ready to go, so I don't make a complete fool of myself. It's still not going to be a good map. I don't draw accurate maps. They're not to scale. You guys understand. It's just very general. But it's not going to be hopefully as bad as last week, because that was even embarrassing by my standards. So you have this general bed right here, and again, not to scale, but down here you have Jerusalem, approximately up there is Antioch, and then you have over here, I'm going to mess this one up. Kind of have over here, I went down too far. What general area is over here? Okay, Greece. What's it kind of known as, though? All right, so yeah, Macedonia up here, Achaia down here, and then little isthmus right there. So you have Corinth is going to be right here, and then looking out up here, let's see, I need to, this one's better, okay. So up here, and I'm getting into my thing over here, but that's all right. All right, so down over here you have Rome, which is about up in there or so. And then you have Spain coming out there. All right, so that is good enough by my standards. Last week's was pretty atrocious, but this is at least better. I at least have the boot going the right direction and everything. He's wanting to come, or let's see, out here. Where did he meet up with Priscilla and Aquila? Where were they? All right. They were in Corinth, right? They were right here on his which journey? Second, right? His first one, he only made it to here. On his third journey, he's writing to them in Rome, right? So we're on his second journey right here. Why were they in Corinth on Paul's second journey?
They got kicked out.
Kicked out of what?
Rome.
Oh, so they were initially in Rome. They got kicked out. Why? Why did they get kicked out of Rome? Were they just Rome's most wanted criminals or something? Why did Aquila and Priscilla? Why them specifically? Yeah, but a little more information. Okay, the emperor kicked out all of the Jews, right? Yeah, but it was the emperor. Yeah, absolutely. The emperor kicks out all of the Jews, says, you know what? I'm tired of y'all bickering and arguing over this Crestus guy. Just get out of here. I don't want to hear it. And so they're here. When Paul writes this letter, where are they? They're over here. What does that mean then? What's that? Okay, the emperor's died and the Jews are allowed back in Rome. Which means there's a period of time that the Roman church was comprised of what? Only Gentiles for a period of time. There were no Jewish Christians there. It was a Gentile, strictly, solely, completely, only a Gentile church. All the Jews were kicked out. What's happened now? All right. Is it only a Gentile church still? No. Now it's a Jew and Gentile church. How many of y'all have, trying to make this, every analogy breaks down, so take it for what it is. How many of y'all have worked somewhere before and they brought in a new boss and things changed? Has that ever happened to anybody before? That things are going, things are smooth, and then a new boss comes or new people come in or whatever the case, and suddenly the way you were doing things isn't good enough anymore. What you were doing, it doesn't work right. Things are now changed, right? Everybody knows that. When change happens, you can run into a lot of problems. Well, what is a potential problem if there's just a Gentile church here in Rome for years, and then the Jews come back in mass? Okay, Sean says they've been doing stuff one way for a while now. Is that going to continue? You know, John, did you have?
Yeah, they may have been doing it correctly for, like you said, several years. They may have been obeying the gospel of Christ, and then the Jews came back in and said, no, 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 you can't do that. And the Gentiles were saying,
Okay, well, okay, hold on. I can only digest so much unless we get a mic on you here. No. Here comes the mic. Okay, all right. Go ahead, start over.
It may be for the 2 years that they were there that they were doing it correctly. They were doing it as they were taught from the beginning by whoever, and they were obeying the gospel the way the gospel was presented. Jews came back, had a misconception of what the gospel was. It may be that the Gentiles were not allowing the Jews to come up and change the things away from what Christ wanted done. Maybe the Jews were the ones, and it was from the viewpoint of those leading the congregation as Gentiles, saying, no, you can't do it that way. So that caused the problem.
Okay.
Because it seems like through the book there was an interchange between, I know you're Gentiles, I know you're Jews, I know you're Gentiles, I know you're Jews. By the way, you're all one in Christ. Mm-hmm. It's all free for all of you. Mm-hmm. Gentiles probably figured that out. All these Jews came back in at once. That may have been the problem. And the Gentiles were upset over it, confused. Maybe they didn't handle it right. And so Paul had to write to them. I think that the first 3 chapters was not only written to the Jews, but it could possibly be written to the Gentiles.
We'll talk about that when we talk about those chapters. And I think there's clues in the way that he writes it's all for the Jews. I don't think he really addresses the Gentiles, really, until you get into chapter 11, 10, 11, around in there. Is when he shifts his focus and says, now, y'all Gentiles, don't think that you're going to get away completely unscathed. But yeah, we'll talk about that and his use of pronouns and stuff like that, in the first few chapters. Mike, did you have?
So I'll distract everything I said before.
Oh, don't.
It probably wasn't the Gentiles who doing anything right. It was probably the Jews coming in trying to
Yeah.
set things back up the way it's supposed to be.
Yeah, don't. John was saying that he would retract what he was saying. You don't have to do that. No, there may be something to what you were just saying. Absolutely, that there's a philosophical kind of a difference that they may be running into. Mike?
Well, I was just going to say, however you look at it, there is the potential for an us-them thing, and I think that he has to address that, or he is addressing that. In the book, but in the first part too, where it's everybody sinned. It's not like one of you did and one of you didn't. So there's instead of being dichotomous, there's actually a unity.
All right, very good, Kevin. Mike's on its way. All right, go ahead, Kevin.
I was just going to add that the Judaizing teachers probably had some success, and there were some Gentiles who had bought into this scenario. So they, in turn, would have been allies, I guess, with the Judaizing teachers in proclaiming this type of path to salvation. So you could say that it's written to anybody, or to address, this question is addressed to everybody, but specifically to people who have gone astray in accepting this path to salvation through the Jewish supposed seed.
Yeah. I'm going to kind of spend just a little bit your beginning point, or I don't know, maybe contradict it a little bit. But it's not you. It's the typical way that this whole conversation is generally looked at. Sharon, did you just put your hand up? Or?
Zola was in Rome, and then they left Rome, went to Corinth for a good period of time. Now they're back in Rome. Do we know how much time has passed from when they returned to Rome to when Paul is writing this letter? Do you have a general idea?
I don't have it in my head. It would be the death of Claudius, but I can't just off the top of my head remember exactly.
should look at the time then to figure out how much space. I got it.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that, and that's just a quick, answer to that without digging too deeply. So hopefully that's correct and not incorrect. Interestingly, go to chapter 15. And this is once Paul has finished his entire argumentation, the entire discussion. You get all the way through. This is the ending point as he is transitioning from talking about this to then saying, this is what I want to do. I want to make my way to you and everything. So, chapter 15, verse 14, he says, "My brothers and sisters, I myself, I am convinced about you, that you are full of goodness, filled with all knowledge, able to instruct one another. Even so, I've written to remind you more boldly on some points because of the grace given me by God to be a minister of Christ Jesus to the Gentiles, serving as a priest of the gospel of God. Purpose is that the Gentiles may be an acceptable offering sanctified by the Holy Spirit. Therefore, I have reason to boast in Christ Jesus regarding what pertains to God." All right, so what does that sound like? Let me ask this. Compare this to the letter that he wrote to the Galatian churches. Are there any differences?
He's not as scolding. He's not scolding.
Yeah. What's his attitude towards the churches in Galatia?
He's ticked.
Yeah, he is upset. He is angry. He's like, I cannot even fathom what has taken place here. I can't believe that you have started doing this and that you would actually buy into all of this and that you would believe that and that you're teaching this. And I wish the people who were teaching that, and everything, well, we don't need to go on that. But, just how vitriolic everything that he says throughout the entire letter. This is a little different, isn't it? Never, not once through this letter do you have Paul speaking in a demeaning, overbearing, angry, you're absolutely messed up and wrong kind of a way. My take, yeah, go ahead.
When I think about that, I always think, Peter was at Galatia too. And what a blow that must have been to Paul to have Peter go along with and separate himself from eating with the Gentiles. That must have been really another low blow to Paul.
That was though in Antioch and not in Galatia where that took place. So that was in Antioch where Paul's base of operation is, where you had that, which fits into the discussion because he brought that up in the letter to the Galatians as an example. And so that is true. My take on this is that Paul is writing, and as he's writing to this church, he is not writing to correct an issue. He's not writing because there's a problem in Rome. He's not writing because the Judaizers have invaded and have taken over. I don't think that Paul is writing because there's a real issue that is happening and he has to write this in order to deal with it. I think Paul is writing because there's a potential issue. There could be a problem. There might be some issues, and he writes everything really to get himself to chapters 14 and 15, in which he lays down, Jews, this is how you treat the way that the Gentiles do things. Gentiles, this is the way that you treat how the Jews do things, and you get along no matter what. I think he's writing to a potential issue that may or may not crop up in Rome but he's not actually addressing a certifiable issue that he has heard that they're actually going through, which is why he says, hey, I have every confidence in you. I'm sure that everything is going just fine. Y'all are doing great. I'm convinced that you're full of goodness. You're filled with knowledge. You know this already. I'm not telling you anything new. You guys are going to do this. You've been doing this. I know Aquila and Priscilla. I know some of y'all. I know. I'm just reminding you just to make sure that this doesn't become an issue. Does that make sense? Yeah, Mike?
Yeah, I think you're right. I think he's being preemptive. And because for one thing, Priscilla and Aquila, it's not like they wouldn't get it. I mean, so that you've got these people that are capable of teaching others. They have a solid basis there. So I don't think there is the problem. I think it's totally preemptive.
Yep.
Which incidentally, I think is the main reason for the letter and the other part secondary, but that's okay. We can disagree on that.
I didn't understand what you just said.
I said, which I think is the primary reason for the letter, and the Spain piece is kind of tagged along because it's, but that's okay.
Yep, that's all right. You can be wrong. I mean, it happens. Happens to the best of us, right? No. Yeah, and there's no way I'm just basing it off of what it seems to me is the most logical. I totally could be wrong on what prompted Paul to sit down at a desk and pull out his pen or a quill or whatever it is. So yeah, that very well may be. See, Kevin had a hand up over here.
All those things are probably so. I was thinking about him being now a little bit older and his way of expressing himself, probably taking a milder approach to whatever it may be. And it may be that this is preemptive, don't know, but I think as we get older, we find maybe some other way to be persuasive other than maybe just raising our voice. And not say that's necessarily Galatians, but just another way of approaching the problem.
Well, to further what you're saying, I think Galatians is a knee-jerk reaction. I think that's the first time that he's running into the issue, is when he hears about what the churches in Galatians are doing. And so it's a very raw, emotional, just reactive type of a letter, whereas you move 7 or 8 years down, and he has seen this now. He's had time to reflect on it. He's had conversations by now, with the apostles. Now at this point, the Acts 15 conference has taken place where it had not taken place before the writing of Galatians. You have a lot of other things. I can totally see what you're saying, Kevin, that his reaction, even if there was an issue, the way that he addresses it now would be different from Galatians anyway. I think that's valid. Yeah, absolutely. I'm not taking anything away from that. I just personally, I think that chapter 15, verse 14, indicates that it's not, that it is more a preemptive discussion. But what Kevin says is absolutely valid as far as maturity and being less brash. Yeah, go ahead, Mike.
Claudius died in 54.
Boy, I cannot understand. What did you say?
Claudius died in 54.
54. Okay. All right. Thank you. Yes, somebody found that information. So we are just a couple of years past that at this point. So if you put it at 55, 56, then yeah, they have not been there. They have not returned for very long. All right. Thank you for that bit of information. Who got that? Found that? That was Kathy? All right. I figured that wasn't Mike's doing, that somebody passed that to him and he was just taking credit for it. So we won't let that happen. All right. Any other questions or comments? We're going to close it up here, and we're going to get into the text next week. I did not look. Are there still handouts back there from last week? Because there are no new handouts because what we had last week was for the first lesson and the second lesson both. If you don't have that, and it appears that there aren't any back there, let me know, and I can get some more printed out. And just notice on our, the syllabus here, the order of how we're doing things. Some lessons we're going to spend 2 weeks on. I mean, that's just some things we have to. Others will get one, and I'm scared that the ones that get one will still spend 2 weeks on, because that could very well happen. When you look at it again, this is I hope we do it this way, not a definite this will be the way that it is. But next week, we'll get into Romans 1, verses 1 through 17. And in that, we'll talk about the epistolary format and his thesis. We'll spend a lot of time on his thesis, verses 16 and 17. Sharon? Okay.
He's talking to a lot of people there at greeting, but he's also talking about, I appeal to you, brothers, to watch out for those who cause division. So there's a lot of information in there summarizing why this letter might be written, in my opinion. Are you going to address that early on, or are you going to wait until later?
It probably won't get much attention at all.
Oh, okay.
I mean, that type of thing. I mean, that would be part of this discussion, to which I would say, he says, watch out for those who create divisions, obstacles contrary to the teaching that you've learned, avoid them. And I think he's talking about Judaizing teachers, preemptively saying, if they teach a different gospel than what we teach, avoid those people. Don't even let them have a foothold into it. Just because we're only spending 2 quarters, there's a lot of stuff that are not going, verses that we won't even touch. And unfortunately, chapter 16 is going to be a casualty, I think. So, it's a good question, though. So, all right, thanks a lot, guys. That was the second bell. We will go ahead and close it up here. Appreciate the class.